I've just joined as a, yeah, okay. I guess I can just share my screen and start then, is that right?
I
Shall I
might
crack?
have to alter the permission settings to allow that. Allow participants to share screen. If you try now, that should work. So,
Okay.
Northland Edible Garden Trail, 2nd of February, 2024, and we have Charles Dowding, who's been so supportive in helping make this event possible. Hugely grateful. And my hope tonight is that someone hears what you're saying and says, we need to get this guy over to New Zealand, and your next tour will be down our way. So without further ado, I will hand over to you. Have you got everything set up?
Yeah, absolutely. So can you see me or can you see my slide just to check?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And it's really lucky you put the link in Instagram, Katrina, because I wasn't sure where to find it. It's amazing how much goes on in the back end of Instagram. I've been no dig for over 40 years and not talking much about it in the 1980s, but at that time there wasn't interest in soil really. I was organic, and that's what people were more interested in. And it's only recently I feel that there has been serious interest in the soil, which is great for my work because I've got enough experience now to uh, talk about it, explain it, and have great discussions. And I'm running a market garden as well as doing everything else somehow. And this is one of my customers. She's quite a famous chef actually, who lives not far away. Really keen on using vegetables. Until very recently, I've not known many chefs who actually appreciate vegetables, but they are starting to appear now, and that's great for my selling. But I sell mostly actually to a spa shop in Bruton, of all places. And again, until recently, sales have not been strong, I would say. And I don't make a profit in the market garden, sadly, but I have a really good guy who I pay, and basically he frees up my time to do it. We're selling a lot of salad bags, so this is the main output from the market garden. Mainly, particularly in financial terms, it's the only product of vegetables really that pays a wage. I pay people who work here around £15 an hour, and that's way above the minimum wage, but it's still only just enough to survive around here, especially where property prices are so high and mortgages and everything. So we're harvesting a lot of vegetables as well as salad, and it's a great joy, and it fits in very well with my teaching work because I want to enthuse and encourage loads of people to get into vegetable growing, and that is what's going to make such a difference in the mess which we're in at the moment, I feel. Yeah, this is homemakers from the air. Side by side gives you an idea of the change through the season. So February to late May. At the moment, it's pretty much where we are on the left, except that we're not frosty right now, but it will be in 10 days' time. So we've got plenty of winter ahead of us still. Most of the beds are empty, but that doesn't mean the soil is bare. I notice a lot of confusion in the gardening world about terms, and people say to me like, oh, your soil, your beds are bare in the winter. And no, they're not. The soil is not bare. It's covered with a compost mulch, and the paths are covered with wood chip, and that means it's ready for plantings in the spring. Whereas, people who haven't looked into it really will come out with these comments that are very confusing, and they'll say things like, "Oh, you should have living roots in the soil all winter." Well, they obviously haven't tried to grow things here in the winter when not much grows. And the point is, you need to have the beds ready for planting in the early spring. And if you've got, say, cover crop green manure in the way, well, that's not so easy. For this to work, especially on commercial scale, well, even home scale, actually, you've got to be ready. You've got to succeed, basically. And if you don't succeed, well, you haven't got food to eat, and there's not much point. So my work is always about finding the methods that actually work best. And that in this climate here, which although we're 51 degrees latitude, which in your terms would be, I think, somewhere like Invercargill, probably bottom of South Island, 51. And it's the same as the bottom of Chile, actually. That's also 51, where the climate is much colder. But we're fortunate to have what used to be called the Gulf Stream, now the North Atlantic Drift, bringing warm water up from the Gulf of Mexico. So we punch above our weight in terms of latitude and never have extreme heat. Well, not never, hardly ever, and more like consistent warmth. So it's a really great climate for growing. And so we do this double cropping. Most vegetables here grow in half a season, and I keep planting with only one application of compost a year. And that's the beauty of compost. As you know, it's not like fertilizer, it doesn't disappear or wash through after you put it on. So my annual application is around 3 centimeters. I might alternate between centimeters and inches. I'm happy to speak either. So it's about an inch roughly. And that's, I count that after it's settled, but if it's fine compost like here, which is 1 year old, I'm putting on a bit less. So you know, that's where all these numbers can be misleading. There's no one particular number that's sacrosanct. I like that to see the soil covered, and even after rain, that the soil is still covered. It hasn't sort of washed away or anything. It stayed to feed the soil life, and that for me is what compost is. It's not about fertilizing in the conventional sense of that word. In fact, that word fertilizer I should like to see banned from the English language, because it's so flipping confusing and it does not apply to any of this kind of approach. Another one is compacted soil, which is a term used all too often when soil is just naturally firm. And firm is good. Like you can see those broccoli on the right there. They went in as tiny little plants just 3 months before that and are clearly rooting deep, otherwise they would not be standing up. They're not supported, for example. And this is what beds can look like towards the end of autumn, going into winter. The plants like the spinach on the right there over winter. So we put compost on in August, actually, before spreading it. Sorry, before planting the spinach. So I'm always looking to feed the soil once a year, and mostly that happens late autumn after we take final harvest. But this photo is late November, and if you look a bit further beyond those beds recently composted, you can see a lot of crops, vegetables still growing. And again, you know, where's the time for cover crops, green manures? Because we're coming to the end of the season now. So once I put compost on beds like these had grown chicory for radicchio and beetroot and other plants like leeks finishing in the autumn and cabbages and so on. So quite a few harvests are finishing in the autumn, then we spread the compost. That's homemade compost, which is about 8 months old. I'm going to say a bit about making compost in this show. I'm sure many of you will be fascinated by that. This is my approach in the spring. So you can see how the compost over winter tends to break up with weather, and then in early spring or even late winter, just a light pass of the rake over the top gives you a beautiful tilt. And there are still lumps there, but that's fine. I think also we've been conditioned, thanks to use of rototillers and things, to try and achieve too fine a surface. And I'm happy to sow carrots into a surface that can look quite uneven, not uneven, but full of little bits of wood and goodness knows what. And they absolutely love it. I have very good germination rates on carrots and parsnips. I've never struggled with parsnips, always successful. And yet I hear so many people who have been digging and that they're sowing into soil, therefore, and they have a failure. And then we're mainly transplanting. So I find this is the most efficient way. When I say efficient, I mean time and money. It's an important word. If we're not efficient, you know, well, we're just wasting time. And time is the most scarce resource for most of us, I'm sure of that. And, you know, it's not compost. You can make compost, you can't make time. You just got to use your time to the maximum. And so propagation, I'll say a bit more about that as well, can also be very efficient if you get the right kit. I'm popping in these small transplants. That means they're using less space in the propagating house. And yeah, using my long handle dibber, that's really quick. And it's quicker than laying a string. Is just drawing lines in the compost, doing it all by eye. Beds of 1.2 meter pathways there, and no more than 30 centimeters actually. And then covering with fleece, classic in early spring. Probably more for South Island viewers. I think most of you are probably from Northland. I have been to Northland before, actually, in 1988, and I visited Whangarei and worked a little bit on Clayton's organic market garden. That was through Bob Crowder giving me the contact. This is then after transplanting, and yeah, just getting things moving in the spring at such a key time. So I'm using covers quite a bit. Looking back to how I started and why, it was nearby here. I grew up on a farm, and it was a big dairy farm. When I said I wanted to grow organic vegetables, my father gave me a funny look, and I was vegetarian as well, so he thought I was a rabbit anyway. And here I am, worried about weeds, because in the previous autumn, I'd been looking around market gardens, organic market gardens, and all I'd seen was weeds. So I knew there had to be, I had to do something different to that. You know, you've got to stay on the front foot in gardening and be in control of what nature's trying to do to some extent. You know, working with nature, but growing vegetables is not an entirely natural thing. Like, you don't walk through the forest and find a bed of carrots. So I'm using a lot of paper, straw, hay, anything I get my hands on, and I sure did control the weeds, but I also lost a lot of plantings to slugs. So that taught me how, in my climate, which is potentially very sluggy, using compost was better. This is part of my market garden later in the 80s, where I was cropping a large area, nearly 8 acres, and using less compost because I wasn't doing so much double cropping in those days. Over the course of my life, I've scaled down and become more intensive in my growing. Plus now I'm not basically working so hard outside, I haven't got the time. It's not that I don't like work, I've got so many other things to do. In those days, I was probably 80 hours a week, just crazy amount of time, and I had 4 full-time helpers as well. And it was great. We were supplying a lot of customers in London. And then I did get disillusioned with the amount of time and effort needed. In my 20s, I still didn't have a very good balance of life perspective. I was saying, ended up inheriting some money from my father and buying a small farm in France, 40 acres, which cost £40,000 in 1991. And there I am growing no-dig vegetables with quite a lot of mulch, which was more applicable to that warmer, drier climate. And on the right, you can see I'm selling some produce in their lovely market stall. That's a small town of no more than 4,000 people. The French way of life is certainly captivating. But nonetheless, we had small children at the time and decided to come back to home. You never lose that sense of home. And this was actually then my third market garden, which is, again, 6 miles from here. It's on the family farm, a different part, and it's clay soil. So I've had a good range of soils, and I know that no-dig works really well on horrible clay. This was actually a bit nicer clay. The farm in France was on difficult clay. Again, you know, I feel people have been brainwashed to believe that soil has to be loose, and that's why I get this question all the time: does no-dig work on clay? It works brilliantly on clay. You know, clay soil is one of the best soils to grow vegetables. It holds moisture, holds nutrients. You can see I'm on a slope there, and I run the beds up and down, and this is where no-dig diverges from common advice, because it's often said you should follow the contour so that erosion doesn't happen, blah, blah, blah. But if you haven't loosened the soil, you're not going to get erosion. And we would have some big rainfalls there, and look what happens. So you've got, I just realized I'm not showing full screen, actually. Let's see if I can work it. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, so you can see the water, and it was running up and down and not eroding the soil. I lose a little bit of path march maybe, but that got the water away. And the climate here is around 40 inches, 1,000 millimeters of rain a year, with a few extreme weather events. I would say the weather has not changed a huge amount in the course of my lifetime. It was a beautiful garden, and started to attract more attention. I'd been on television in the 1980s, and then I disappeared out of view in the 1990s when I was in France. And when I came back, I wasn't even sure I was going to do market gardening, but did get into it thanks to discovering salad bags, and then started to write my books from 2007. So it's only quite recently I've been in the public eye much. But I remember the BBC Gardener's Question Time coming to this garden and being amazed, because with no dig, you can do amazing things. And one thing I've noticed when arriving at Homemakers, this came about because I separated from my wife actually and had to leave in some speed, and was very fortunate to find Homemakers, which nobody wanted because the house is so little and not attractive to people who want some land. The cost was around £370,000. That was in 2012. And then I put on a conservatory, which made the house nicer. It's still too small for me, really, but I'm managing. And I really like this place because it's got land all around. But it had been a nursery in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And it's windy here. So the guy planted these trees. And when I saw them, I thought, right, these have got to come down. Too much darkness. And more than anything, too many roots. It's the problem with trees and hedges too close to vegetables. So I had the trees cut down. And then my garage roof blew off. So that brought it home to me that, yeah, there's quite a bit of wind here. But I still don't want windbreak trees there. You know, with market gardening, you can manage with wind, and you can manage certainly with soil like this. Actually, is really good. So it's a silt sog, quite heavy. I've noticed if we ever do disturb it, like when digging the pond, you get a sticky mess basically. And I'm so glad to be no dig from that point of view. You don't get mud on your boots with no dig. You know, it's such a beautiful method in pretty well every single way. And I'm happy to see that clay. But that clay is a good clay for gardening because it does let some water through. There are more difficult clays than that. I had it in France and it still works. So putting the compost on top is starting point. If you are doing maybe flowers, for you know, many people, in fact, most people doing flower gardening in the UK for selling are no dig now, close to 90%, I reckon. And you know, it's just like it ticks all the boxes, but you do need a fair amount of compost to start with. That I know puts people off, but going forwards, you don't. And if you're starting without weeds, if you're starting on clean soil, I would put on just 5 centimeters, 2 inches to begin, which is not an unusually large dose by any means. I'll say more about that as we go forwards. Here I'm using a mix of bought compost and homemade, and I'd run out of cardboard, which is why I'm not putting any under the compost on that bed. So perennial weeds do come through in the first few months, and that's where you need to be busy. That's again where some people lose interest because they think it's not working. But weeds like creeping thistle, couch grass, bindweed above all, I'm sure you know all of those, and probably have your own like kikuyu. I've had correspondence from New Zealand. People got rid of some of these very vigorous trailing grasses, but again, you've got to be really on it, and particularly you've got to mulch your pathways. And that's why I'd run out of cardboard for the bed, because I was prioritizing my paths. It's no good having weeds in a path, even if you have a weed-free bed, because they just spread back in. And I'm using no wooden sides, just temporary ones at the beginning now, which disappear because I remove the wood after a month or 3 months or whatever it might be. Always find loads of slugs when I do that. There's a few beds I was keeping wooden sides, and that was my trial beds. And the next picture shows you putting more on the cardboard around the edges. So this is second application of cardboard in year 1. It's only in year 1 that I use any cardboard. Again, this causes misunderstandings because people think you have to put it down every year. That's not the case at all. It's just to help smother the existing initial presence of whatever weeds there are. It buys you a bit of time, basically reduces their pushing up through. So that's just 4 months later. You can see how effective this approach is for the beds themselves, and the soil clearly is opening up to vegetable roots to have tall plants like that. And this also shows early summer in that first year, where I had a lot of couch grass there. So I'd been removing it from the beds, and I put a second application of cardboard, just held down with a few stones, as you can see. At this point, I don't want to put wood chips on because it just keeps it clear for putting more cardboard on top, and I don't want to get too much wood sort of going down into the soil at this point and keep the wood on the surface. So this is, again, first year. I must emphasize that you wouldn't see this in any other year. Heavy use of cardboard, just that once. And then going forwards, no cardboard, no wooden sides. This is a garden from second year onwards. It's looking like this, where we're doing some edging. That's an important part of it, so I'll stop the grass spreading in. But you can see how the paths, as well as the beds, have leaves over them mostly. There is room to walk between. I don't want big wide avenues for my pathways. That's a waste of space. And what I want is maximum use of the sunlight by plants to be bringing carbon into the soil. That's the engine which drives our work, and plant growth is carbon. Thank goodness there's CO2 in the atmosphere, otherwise we're all stuffed. And the sunlight through photosynthesis enables plants to convert that CO2 into carbon compounds in the soil, which are the engine of soil life and provide fuel for the growth like this. So no dig where you're using compost is not about applying nutrients in soluble form at all, and only indirectly. It's more than anything about allowing soil life, encouraging also soil organisms to make those nutrients available as and when they're needed, and they're insoluble. So you put compost on in before the winter rain washes through, you don't lose anything that way. So that this all links into the composting process. Then people ask, well, why can't you put on just the same materials you put in your compost heap? Why not put them directly on the soil? Well, that goes back to my observations about hay and a build-up of slugs. So this, to get a result like you're seeing here, which is actually what you need to have a thriving market garden and make a little bit of money, one hopes, and not just be losing money. So if your garden to thrive and survive and thrive, you know, that's, again, it links back to compost and compost making. Vegetables are very particular plants and need every bit of care and attention to get a result like this. A lot of that is second plantings, and again, very few weeds. So that also links back to good composting. Oh, sorry. There's a quick look at another way. I can use my mouse to show you that little bit of ground there is this whole space here on the right. And that's where I bought this piece of land in 1991 without actually wanting to, but it kind of fell into my lap. I paid £42,000 and it was the best money I ever spent. And if I hadn't bought it, someone else might have. But then I looked at it, what the flip am I going to do here? And I had no plan. And so I made a hole in the hedge and started on 300 square meters there. And then I was amazed to see how much convolvulus arvensis field bindweed is there. Or I should say was, because we got rid of that within 2 years. No dig, again, just quite remarkable, but also with a lot of persistence. And because of the amount of bindweed, I started using some black plastic, which I got for free from my son who's in farming. There's a lot of it knocking around on farms here. Even if you had to buy it, it's still worth it because you can reuse it several times. This is not single-use plastic, it's UV treated. And at the end of the season, which often here is between July and September, we roll it up and just put it somewhere to use again the following year if we need it. So it's a great resource. And under the plastic is compost. And then you just taking you through the year, I'll explain this in a bit more detail in a minute. And you can see I've put a shed up, and you know, this is all coming together, back of an envelope. Plans. I'm not a great one for planning. I'd much rather be in a place and feel my way through it and see how it evolves and then work out how to go from there. You can sort of meet your needs better, really, I feel, by planning like that in a fluid way. You can see I'm taking a new ground as well at the bottom of both of these photographs. And by the end of year 2, the rectangle on the right is clear of bindweed. Even I was somewhat surprised by this, but it basically just stops growing if you regularly remove the new growth, which is not as easy as it sounds, but it is worthwhile. It's an investment of time which buys you a lot of time going forwards. So I want to be spending not too much time weeding, but I'll go at it in the first year or two wherever needed and be very thorough and comprehensive so that we get to a situation like this, a very clean ground, easy to crop, like 1,500 square meters or a bit more for 310 hours a week. For the amount of time we spend harvesting, I would say is pretty impressive. You can see also how we're creating the lovely grass around these plots. It's nothing to do with grass seed or laying turfs, it's just mowing. So we're mowing that rough pasture on the right, and in the British climate where we get reasonably regular rainfall, we get this lovely green sward, which is actually only about 50% grass. There's still loads of creeping buttercup, dandelion, daisies, bindweed, and that's fine. I don't mind, you know, who said you have to have 100% clean grass? So we're using the lawnmower quite a bit, and that's my only petrol engine tool on the holding. Adam is just mowing a bit there because it makes it easier to spread the compost evenly. Then plastic on top. This is taking in new ground last year. It's just a way of doing it where we're laying black plastic on the ground, holding it down with pallets in the wind. And then we put a bit extra compost, aiming to get around 7-8 centimeters on in year one there. It's not, I would say, not a massive amount, but it's more than I can make. So I'm buying in green waste compost or mushroom compost or cow manure or old wood chip, actually, using some of that as well. And then May the 19th, so in your language, that's like November the 19th, it's warming up finally, and we're transplanting those squash, which are month-old plants, and just making a hole, if there's not a hole already, because that plastic is 4 years old by now. And look at that fantastic growth within 6 weeks by the end of June, at the beginning of summer still, really. It's just like amazing. In the background is rye, which I'm growing for some grain to harvest by hand. Very inefficient way of using time to make some bread. It's more out of curiosity than anything. And then the squash harvest, well, fantastic. Curry squash, I'm sure you know that one, and crown prince, and we're still eating those now. These photos are actually last September, and those squash still very well, particularly the crown prince. And then we roll up the plastic and make beds, and it's clean ground. Here we're starting out again. This is going back a couple of years now, and on big, vigorous bindweed Adams planting potatoes from Home Saved Potatoes, actually. This is one of the many myths, you know. It bugs me that so many gardeners are misinformed, and they're told, for example, they can't use their own potatoes for seed. There are just so many statements like that, a 4-year rotation, you know. You just need to understand more about soil and plants, and no dig enables you to avoid most of these unnecessary rules. Here's the bindweed growing under plastic. I lifted up the black polythene to get the photo on the left, and I love the phrase futile growth, because it's basically wearing out the energy that's in the parent root, which we never see or try to dig out. But we do keep removing any regrowth at the surface, including through the planting holes. And that was at harvest time of these potatoes, 2 crates in that case. And I put them in sacks, keep them in my outbuilding, where they store very well, actually. Second earlies, I find they're pretty much as good as main crops, but you get the earlier harvest time to transplant some leeks, for example. And this is the bindweed removal using copper tools. If you don't know copper tools, do check them out, but I don't know how available they are in New Zealand. It's strictly speaking bronze, 95% copper, 5% tin, and that gives more durability and strength. And neither of those metals rust, so you've got a beautiful smooth surface, easy to use. And I'm putting all of that on my compost heap, a load of bindweed roots if we're in that process. Edges is so important. They're always spreading in the grass, and tight mowing helps, because that reduces the vigor of any potential sward. It's the opposite of mob grazing, which encourages growth of grass and weeds. Tight mowing reduces the root vigor, and so that slows down the invasion. But sometimes I will use cardboard if I want to take an edge back. So otherwise I'm using a half moon edger to remove it, which does take a long time, but I don't know another way at the moment. And then this is where I'm doing trials. I'm doing a lot of trials, because one is always learning, and it's brilliant for teaching as well. So 2 beds side by side. One I dig every December. I do it myself, and I'm very happy to do that, because it teaches me a lot about digging, the effort involved, how long it takes. But also when you add in compost even to the soil, I dig every December. It's really improving, and the digging now is a lot easier than it was in the beginning when the soil was more lumpy. And next to the dig bed, I have a no dig bed where the compost is simply spread on top. And it's the same amount of compost for both beds. This is a really important point, because some people look at this trial and obviously thinking I'm not putting compost on the dig bed. And they also think that, you know, you only need compost if you're no dig, which is just such a ridiculous statement. You'll see why in a minute. So these beds side by side, the only difference, it's about isolating one variable, and the variable is no dig on the right, dig on the left. Everything else is the same plantings, everything. And that was a recent planting in early December. So early winter this year, we popped in broad beans and peas just to have something in the ground over winter. Most of my beds, I can't afford to do this, but for the trial, we'd raise transplants and pop them in. And Last year they didn't grow much. This year they have, because it's been warmer. And then those plants, the beans and peas, will come out, cut them at the root early March, and then transplant vegetables mid-March. So that's your mid-September. For us, that's just before or around equinox time. We're getting enough warmth and light to make it worth planting outside with covers over for the initial 4 to 6 weeks. Keep these plants maintained, and you can see the differences starting to appear. That's dig on the left, always no dig on the right. Even the potatoes, look at that. And that's 8 potatoes in 2 rows across. Above the potatoes is carrots and fennel. And look at I lost a few cabbage. I don't know what happened there, but look at these onions difference. That's onions on the no dig bed, onions on the dig bed. Same transplants put in at the same time. And every year there's a few remarkable standouts like that. This is a table of differences over the spring 22 as it happens, and you can see a 20% increase of plantings of growth harvest from the no dig bed for the same amount of compost. You know, this is the key point. So when people say to me, I couldn't do no dig because I can't get enough compost, I put it the other way around. I said, you can't afford to be digging because you're wasting compost. You're losing carbon as CO2 in the cultivation process. We're doing second plantings there in these beds through the autumn. So it's 2 plants a year. Again, no more compost in the summer. This is just the one application in the winter, and that gives results like this. These charts are on my website, or most of them. If you look under the About tab, and you'll see a drop down, and there's a trials pages, which I keep mostly up to date. And you know, a table like that on the left, I think potentially useful for a lot of people, because it can also give you an idea of what you might expect to harvest from one bed. Yeah, look at that column on the right in the table. That's one bed of 1.5 by 5 meters. 102 kilos of harvest last year, and every year it's over 100 kilos, as you can see there. That's the light green bar is the no dig bed. Every year 100 kilos of harvests, kitchen ready harvest, trimmed. You know, we put the rest of the rejects and trimmings on, everything, discards on the compost heap. How many vegetables do you eat in a year? Yeah, this is very empowering knowledge, I feel. And then when you look at this, you can see also the extraordinary difference between soil that's been dug and no dig. And what you see on the right there, at first you might think, oh, it's all lumpy, but that's times 400 magnification. What you're seeing there is what agronomists call aggregation or structure. And you've got the soil held together by glues like the glomalin from mycelial sheaths, and that enables air to stay present and water to drain through and roots to pass through easily. It's just a really good soil if you get a picture like that. And then you see this kind of thing happening on the soil. That's an indication in wet weather that there's mycelial activity. I'm always happy to see any kind of mycelial growth on the surface. Maybe not honey fungus. I've got that in a bit of the garden, actually. Curious to see how it goes. But nearly all fungi mycelia are beneficial, and it used to be said that most of them were not helping vegetables to grow. You know, that was mycorrhizal mycelial scientists in the 1980s when I started, and they've now changed their mind, but they never say, oh, sorry, we were wrong before. They just come out with a new version, which is that, yeah, vegetables do link to the mycelial network, and that's why we can get results like this with no dig. That's my small garden, so it's another trial area. See how much can grow on 25 square meters with no rotation, just moving crops around in 1 meter square blocks roughly, and rapid transplanting, even underplanting. You see in the middle there, there's spinach planted under tomato plants, cordon tomatoes, which will soon finish. So maximizing use of space. And more charts. This is a different trial on the left. I'm not going to spend too long on this because, again, it's on my website, 3-strip trial. But it's given an idea. I put this one in particularly because of strip 1. Strip 1 is soil that we fork once a year. You know, some people say to me, oh, yeah, I'm no dig, and I do broad forking. I say, well, you're not no dig. It's not no dig. What are you doing? You're breaking up the mycelial network. I'm sure that's why we're finding 9% less harvest over 10 years of doing this on strip 1. And these are strips 2 meters by 9 meters, each one. And same plantings, as you can see, in each strip, harvest on the same day. Again, everything the same, just the one difference is strip 1 is forked, strip 2 is no dig, same compost. Strip 3 is also no dig, but different compost, which is mostly cow manure, but animal compost. I'm slightly hesitating there. You'll see why in a minute as well. So this is a typical harvest morning from the 3-strip trial, strip 1 on the left, 2 in the middle, and 3 on the right. And it's not always that much difference, but I took this photo recently just to give an idea also of the process we're using to run this trial. So I'm harvesting the same from the same number of plants on each strip. If it's kale, picking it to the same level, you know, whether they're small or big plants, picking the same number of leaves off each plant, that kind of thing. And then just quickly looking through the harvest that we're getting on these 3 strips and replanting. So the left-hand photo is mid-spring. You see turnips, spring onions, broad beans, potatoes not yet in the ground or not yet emerged, and lettuce and spinach. And even within about 2 months, massive differences. So the turnips finish. We've now got squash plants, 2 squash plants in each bed. So 6 altogether. So when I say bed, there's 3 beds. Each strip has 6 beds, and there's beds run across away from you as you look at it, and the strips run diagonally left to right. This maybe I haven't got time to fully show the details here. It's just give you a visual idea. This is all in the same year, the same area, the 3-strip trial. And you can see again, if you just look at the squash, they're now maturing on the left. That's curry, uchiki curry. And already they've been replaced by spring onions, salad onions, which are there at the moment. They're overwintering. And the parsnips in the second bed, we're harvesting them at the moment. There's 1 more row still to harvest. The spinach, which we planted after lettuce, which followed broad beans, are still there, and they're cropping at the moment. Leeks are finished. Cabbage and kale still cropping, so and so it goes on. And this is one thing I tried last year, which I found really interesting. It was not intentional. We'd run out of cow manure, and I'd asked Adam to spread some of the cow manure on this bed nearest to the concrete path in December. And we looked at each other, and he said, "Well, we've got the manure from the compost toilet in the garden." So lo and behold, that's what we did. And you can see what it looks like. That's 18-month-old on average poo from the compost toilet, which we sprinkle a bit of wood shavings on after each visit. It's never turned. When we take it out, it's beautiful. You know, that's what it looks like, and it has no aroma whatsoever. I'm sure that this chimes with a lot more of you than people in the UK find this extraordinary that you could do such a thing. But look at the harvest result. 21 kilos compared to 9 kilos on the neighboring bed with what I might call normal compost. I'm not saying this would happen every time. And there's always other factors actually that those plants might have sprawled a bit more, but actually not a lot really. Anyway, it's got me interested. I've only got so much of this compost, but we're going to try potatoes this year with it. We'll see what happens. This is just a quick overview of yields. So kilograms per square meter, if you get up to 10 or even 11 sometimes, that you're doing well in my book. I would say more like an average is 4. We're doing pretty well on the 3-strip trial with 6. But if you ever record your harvest and work this out, yeah, I can give you some good insights. And I just note that here in my meter square, I'm counting 1 pathway because that's a true reflection of the area used. So it's the width of the bed and the width of 1 path. The width of the other path goes to the bed next to it, and the width of 1 end as well. And so there you go. Making compost. This is key to good gardening and not just no dig. And I'm doing a lot of demos for a range of garden sizes. So because I'm doing so much teaching here, this is always useful to have the smaller scale Daleks, we call them. And that is a bigger Dalek. It's 330 litres. You can get the 220. I find this one, these are good actually. I get good results from them. They don't get quite as hot, but that doesn't matter. You can make lovely compost without heat. And in this case, I'm turning it. I could have used some of that compost on the bottom, but it was summer and I didn't need it. And so green and brown, roughly 1/4 brown, 3/4 green. I'm sure Katrina will know all the issues around trying to explain this to people, you know, in terms of volumes and proportions. When I started out, it was presented as 32 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. That's what you must do. A statement like that is enough to put everybody off composting. How are you supposed to calculate the percentage of carbon in stuff you look at like that? So talking about it in brown and green is, I find, much simpler for me and simpler to explain. And that's my formula roughly, but it's so variable. You have to get your eye in and try it as well. And that's what makes it such a beautiful thing to do, actually. Every heap is different. There's always different materials to put in, different proportions, different times of year. You can chuck anything in. People have been told wrongly that they can't put things like citrus peels, rhubarb leaves, weed roots, weeds. So much. There's a long list, and it just makes it sound so difficult and time consuming. This can be quick. It's got to be quick. It still, though, takes more time. Well, no, it doesn't actually. I know most, I would say, organic market gardeners in the UK are not making compost. And this disillusions me. They're not going to this amount of trouble for sure. This is more for medium-sized gardens, I would say, or what we call allotments in the UK. So that's very simple and cheap. It's 4 pallets. We knock the bottoms off, makes them easier to handle and access. 4 pallets, 8 bits of wire. Potentially that's all free. I use cardboard to line the sides. That keeps in the warmth. Interestingly, when I started out, these were called New Zealand boxes. Very commonly discussed in the organic world in the 1940s up to the 2000s, and then it went out of fashion a bit. For me, though, I'm happy with solid sides. That's just the point I want to emphasize here. And that's why I'm using cardboard, because I want to keep the warmth and moisture in. It's soil underneath. I've not got cardboard under that compost heap. The card around the edges is because we're starting here on very vigorous perennial weeds, including a lot of bindweed, couch grass, and thistle. Then going forwards, I'm using the 3-base system to get 4 heaps. So we'll fill heap number 1 first. Say you take it over 2 months as an average. So finish it in 2 months, then fill heap number 3. And before filling heap 3, you can turn heap 1 into the middle one, which I call 2. It's still to be made in the first photo there on the left. And so heap 2 takes the turned contents of both 1 and 3 by the end of roughly a 6-month to 8-month period. And there we have it a bit further on. So in this case, heap 1's waiting to be turned. We need to use heap 2 to do that. And heap 3 has just finished, and I've put the cover on top. So I'm covering these heaps. I think the next photo might show this. I keep a roof on finished compost. In the climate we have here, that stops it going too soggy. And people say, what about in dry summer? Or, don't you ever need to water your compost? Well, if it's not raining, the roof isn't keeping any rain out. So basically it stops excess rain. We very occasionally water heaps, but not often in this climate, just in very dry summer weather. Mostly it's the moisture of the leaves. And we're getting compost that looks like you see there on the right. It's not perfect looking, but it's great to use. And I would say that's for me, that's about right. It's got a lot of decent stuff, a bit of half decomposed wood, which feeds fungal life in the soil. And, so don't try and make your compost too perfect looking. You can all make great compost. In fact, you all probably are already, more than you even realize. I find that when teaching it a lot of people don't realize, because they're looking for perfection. And that on top there on the right, you can see hay from the compost loo, where we've got a pea only side box, which is hay or straw. And when it's wet, we put it on the compost heap. So that's another use for the human waste. And hedge trimming's great. Using some machinery like the electric shredder, I find useful. For larger amounts, you would need a motorized one, and I'm looking to hire one at the moment. I haven't got one because we've got a lot of tree prunings. I've had to pull out a willow, for example. A lot of twigs need shredding for that. But for smaller stuff, using a shredder like that or lawnmower is good. Basically, I'm looking to get anything woody stems, even broadbean stems, for example. I cut them to maximum 10 centimeter, preferably 5. Using a knife, slicing diagonally is very effective for doing that. Or cleaving brassica stalks horizontally downwards through them. That is an easy way to cutting across the stem. So everything is going on the compost heap, including couch grass roots, bindweed roots, and I just load on as much as possible in the season. We're maximum time of making compost here is it's spring, summer, autumn really, but we can fill one of these bays, which is roughly 1.8 meters square, or 5 by 6 feet to be precise. Last summer we were filling them in 4 weeks, and so that's pretty rapid manufacture of up to 2 tons of compost, depending at what stage you use it. I'm putting on a lot of disease leaves as well. So courgette with mildew, for example. Again, people have been sold a lot of lies about this, and they've been taught to think that diseases in the garden are just going to spread randomly, just as they've been taught to believe that diseases in people are going to spread randomly, and there's no account taken of the health of the parent plant, or in the other case, the health of people. There are so many analogies between gardening and us. It's very instructive looking across those two boundaries. For example, I could just divulge here a little diverge. Louis Pasteur and Antoine Deschamps, I don't know if you followed that big debate in 19th century science. How do we explain disease? And Pasteur won the argument with his germ theory, which is that the body is an organism needs protecting against disease, germs, virus, bacteria. Whereas Deschamps said the body is a collection of microbes and can maintain its own health when it's well looked after, because we all have all these microbes in us all the time. And health is about having a good balance of microbes, as you can see with these courgette plants. You take off the disease leaves and you realize that the plant itself is really healthy. And because Pasteur won the argument, most people, and it's the current paradigm sitting there unconsciously in the background, unstated assumptions, most people don't know about this way of looking at it. And I love the statement by Eve Balfour when she founded the Soil Association in 1946, and she said, health can be as infectious as disease. Wow, what an empowering statement. This is a profile of the compost heap, actually in December, and showing how, even when it's cooling down through the autumn, we're getting pretty rapid decomposition, mainly through adding sufficient material. I'm running quite a large garden here. People then ask me, well, I never get heat, my heat never gets hot. Well, firstly, I say, don't worry, you still make nice compost, it just takes longer. You won't kill weed seeds, that's probably the biggest one. And to get heat, it's very simple. You just need sufficient volume of material, obviously in proportion, but it's the volume, I think, that small gardens in particular struggle to achieve. That's my son Edward turning a compost heap. I managed to persuade him to do that. Took him a couple of hours. And again, roughly the finished result. Difference between 4 and 12-month-old compost. I'll use the 4-month-old if in the autumn, early winter, we have none other. There's time for it to decompose further on the bed. I prefer to use it more decomposed, like on the right, and particularly in work, say in polytunnels, that kind of thing, and where it's starting to get worms in is always a good sign. They're obviously not there if it's hot at the beginning. And we're often spreading compost with worms in. Obviously, those are Escherichia fetida compost worms, not the Lumbricus terrestris earthworms. And there's Adam spreading some of this compost on the surface. That's really nice 12-month-old compost there, where we've already planted garlic and then we scatter mustard seeds in the compost on top. I've taken to doing this with garlic to get even more life in the soil. We're struggling with garlic rust here outside, so I figure it helps. And this is the result 5 days later on the left. That's the same bed that he was spreading compost on 5 days earlier. But the garlic is planted there. The mustard is coming up. You can see how vigorously that mustard grows, Sun Apis alba mustard. And with no dig, if you want to what I'm doing there is using a time of year when I've got a bit of bare soil. It doesn't happen often because mostly it's vegetables in the autumn still. We sow this mustard and then people say, well, what do you do with it? You can't dig it in. And no, the frost does a great job. So that's after anything below about -5 degrees centigrade. And that's roughly what it looks like at the moment. That photo is about 2 weeks old now. So the mustard has just become stems on the surface like a mulch. And I've never touched that bed since planting the garlic. You can see the garlic was there all the time. And we did this last year, it worked very well. The mustard helps to suppress any weeds, but there are not many weeds. I mean, that weed free is not from me doing much weeding or needing to. The compost is pretty weed free. We're getting enough heat. And no dig, you just don't get many anyway. So this is where it's so much more joyful process. Just that annual application of compost. Going a little bit quickly here, because actually this is a slightly bigger presentation than for the time, but I just wanted to show you a bit of everything. Like example of wood chip, that's from the same tree surgeon. So what it looked like 6 months later, when there's enough green in there, like in this case, the green is conifer, which is totally fine. Again, misconceptions about pH. pH is in my book, much overstated. I don't see it as an important criteria unless you're unlucky enough to have extreme pH. Then obviously you need to react. Most of people in the UK, at least, do not have that. And recent studies are showing how plant roots in healthy soil can change the pH around them. You know, that's another piece of empowering knowledge. We don't need the chemist to intervene. We're using a sieve very occasionally. I never sieve my compost before spreading on beds, but this is about making potting compost and using wood chip as one of the ingredients to hold air in the compost and some life as well. So wood chip, fine like that, old, that's probably 3 years old, what I'm holding there. We are using in the potting mix, which I'm working on recipes for that. And this is the other increasingly important for me part of the potting mix. This is why I'm going to the trouble of having a wormery. It's a lot of extra work to run a wormery for the same amount of compost. But if you've got a reason for it, or if you like looking after worms, you know, worms are a bit like pets. They need regular feeding. And I keep them covered. Like you can see, we get slow worms as well. A lot of life under that plastic. People say worms don't like living under black plastic. That's another lie. You know, they love it, and they get the slow worms. And then sometimes I'll take the plastic off and find a snake there. Snakes eat slow worms apparently, so there's a lot of life going on. That's different ways of feeding the worms. I did a bit of food juicing, vegetable juicing for a while. That's great food for them. Otherwise, I'm using half decomposed compost. The bacterial phases happen, and that's a difference of about a week left to right. When you see the worms near the surface, that's a sign they want some food. This is taking the top off where all the worms are. If we find a mild day in January in the winter, that we scoop it off, that goes to one side, then we've got access to the compost underneath. And here is Adam loading out that compost, and he put it in the shed. The reason for that is I want to get it a bit drier. Worm compost is pretty wet, not soggy, but fully damp, and it needs to be because that's what they like. So we need to dry it before we can sieve it. And then look at this result. So this was last year doing a bit of a trial, 50% worm compost, 50% the old wood chip. And yeah, I didn't know before trying that. How's this going to work? Wow. Because that bought compost is actually a really good one. It's a peat free, one of the best potting compost you can buy in the UK. You can see there's nothing wrong with the growth there, but the dynamism of the plants, you know, I think the worm compost has maybe got some enzymes and kind of growth stimulants in, as well as getting a good structure and everything. And I'm using these module trays as well. Again, how to design these. You know, there's such a lack of good quality materials available to gardeners. I don't think you can get these in New Zealand, sadly. We do export now to Tasmania for Australia, but it's shipping around the world is proving more difficult than I thought it would be. I'm trying to get some to Latin America as well. But the idea of these is very smooth, shiny inside, so the plants slide out really easily, minimal damage, quick, efficient again, minimal use of compost as well. So for the 30 cell tray you can see in the front there, that's 1 litre of potting compost needed for 30 transplants, and they could even be multi-sown beetroot. So that's for 120 beetroot plants from 1 litre of compost. This is partly why I want to get really good compost. And also this saves space in the greenhouse because you're growing a lot of plants in less area needed for propagation. There's a rough example of some mixes I've been using, and yeah, it varies is all I can say, because new materials are always coming available, and also this big learning process. I'm sure many of you are doing these kinds of things already. It's so much learning always in gardening. It's you know, about ourselves as well, you know, how we react to doing all these things. The hotbed is an integral part of my early propagation phase. So we're coming towards the end of winter now, certainly not there yet, and I haven't made the hotbed yet. So I make it 20th of February, so 20th August in Southern Hemisphere terms, to have heat as you come into early spring. There's no point in the winter. And this is not a space heater for the greenhouse, although it does provide a little bit of warmth. Fresh horse manure with straw is ideal if you can get it as fresh as possible. And then the pallet on top, seedlings on top of that. And the temperature there is the bottom figures a probe under the pallet, and the top figures temperature in the greenhouse in late winter, early spring. And I then put another pallet, oh sorry, I've got to flick something there. Presentation. Is that right? I seem to change something else now. Oh boy. Well, I'll go on like this. Yeah, well, this tells us we're 87 and 135. Right. Yeah, do need to keep a move on. Actually, this isn't quite right. I'm just going to see if I can get. Oh, I've lost it. Yeah, I do find touch keys. I have to be careful. Sowing into trays all the time, right the way through the summer, autumn, watering from above, air pruning the roots just by putting them on a wooden pallets, potting plants on. Most of you will know this, but I'm potting on probably a bit smaller than many people. I don't want to wait until the roots are full in that module cell. I want to get them before the plants have any check. Those are 7-day-old cucumbers only. So things are always moving really fast in the propagating. I'm putting out transplants pretty small. Most of the ones you can see on the left are ready to go in the ground. So we're not potting on anything like the main vegetables, anything like cabbage, lettuce, spinach, all the salad plants you can see there. All of those go straight in the ground from the module cells. Multi-sown beetroot, onion, spring onion, they all go straight in the ground from these with these small root balls like the multi-sown there. So fantastic process if you don't know it. There's a page on my website has that detail. This is transplanting chard. I'm always planting deep. I will give you that as a wonderful way of having greater success. So the stems are underground or underground level. I don't fill in the holes, just pop them in. That's speed as well. Just pop them in, push them down, leave it. Water fills in the hole. Thinning out multi-sown plants if there are too many. It's a very joyful way of raising a lot of transplants, and plants love it. It's a kind of companion planting. You know, people often ask me, do I companion plant? Not specifically. And I avoid those long lists of rules about what likes what. You know, for me, that's a massive rabbit hole of despair, because you're then scratching your head the whole time. Does this plant like that plant? No. All plants love other plants, and what they don't like is being miles away from other plants. That's one reason why multi-sowing works so well. They're going in the ground with their mates. And by mixing things up, polycropping, you just achieve automatically a wonderful result. And that links to no dig and soil health, because you don't have to worry about 4-year rotation, which leads people again down a blind alley of having to segregate all their plantings. This nice example on the right there, the Tokyo Cross turnips, you could be sowing those towards the end of summer. So that would be in August in your, sorry, February. Yeah, you're coming to the end of your summer, aren't you? So I would say mid-February for much of New Zealand, sow turnips like that. If you can get the Tokyo Cross, it's a really sweet variety. Sowing single plants for certain vegetables, obviously not everything likes multi-sowing. And using the dibber, the long-handled dibber. I had to design one. I sell these, but most people do make their own, which I'd much prefer. You don't make them, just an old spade handle, but keep the end fat. You want a fat round end, not a pointy one. And that way you'll get a nice rounded hole, which the module root ball drops into. You push it down. And like you can see there, the plants are kind of almost disappearing, but they always survive. And that's really good for covering over in the spring, because it means they're sitting a bit below the surface of the cover. You can see how small the plants, that's broccoli for broccoli in the autumn. So that bed was peas already. And in 17th July, we transplanted those broccoli, which was sown at the solstice. Rapid growth in the summer. I love it. These kinds of plants as well. That's chicory 506 TT. If you can get that variety, I so recommend it compared to other varieties which are available. Endive, as well as chicory, for me, are top salads to plant in summer. You could still be sowing this one now in your part of the world for cropping in the autumn, either scarole or frise endive. And you can pick the outer leaves. That's what we often do. You can cut them. If you cut not too low, you will get regrowth. But outer leaf picking definitely gives more result, more harvest for the end. Sowing direct into the ground, very simple, just drawing lines in the surface compost, then raking over, or in the case of mustard, I broadcast it and then a very light raking. Interplanting, what a way to get more food from the same area of ground. So this is harvesting enough carrots that were sown 3 months earlier to transplant Brussels sprouts. This is early summer, so December in your time. And the same cover serves for both carrots and mesh cover to keep insects out, carrots and Brussels sprout. So this is without putting on any more compost. And look at the result. Those Brussels sprouts on the right have grown in a bed which has already given a huge harvest of carrots. If you look at the old-fashioned gardening journals, they all say that Brussels sprouts are heavy feeders and carrots are light feeders. This is absolute nonsense. Soil is ready for plants at any time and can adapt, if you leave all the microlife there, to whatever you put in. And these so-called heavy feeders are just as happy as the so-called light feeders. That's another term I would consign to the compost heap. In my book, you don't need to think in those terms, and it makes gardening so much more joyful and simpler, because you're popping in plants, interplanting wherever you see space, basically. From the middle of summer, I don't have a planting plan, but I know what I want to grow. So I'm raising transplants, even though I know there's going to be a struggle to find space for them, but I know I want to grow them. So wow, spot this space here, lettuce. So we're picking lettuce every week of the outer leaves. There's a chance to pop the chervil in there. This is towards the end of summer. And by early autumn, you've got the chervil developing strongly and the lettuce are coming to the end of their life. So then they twist out and we've got a bed of chervil. And here we interplanted at the same time multi-sown beetroot and multi-sown spring onion. So I've just harvested some spring onion, just put a trowel under or in the root ball and take out the whole clump. And that's 2 or 3 clumps in my hand there. And that leaves the beetroot to grow on and give you a big harvest in the autumn. So that's a kind of like a free crop using the space. Well, there's underplanting cordon tomatoes with spinach. This is towards the end of summer, or in early summer, sowing carrot between lettuce. There's so many things you can do like this. There's lots more to find out. Soy cabbage, in this case, between onions. So as the onions are maturing, that was a fight to get holes because it was so dry. It was hard work using the wooden dibber. We did need to water the onions, which I wouldn't normally have done. But, you know, this is just watering as another topic massively misunderstood. Most people have been told that you can't water in bright sunlight. That's absolute nonsense. So the point is to water when you have time and when your plants need it. But if it is bright sunlight, I'm putting it on pretty direct. I'm not trying to make a fine mist. And that way most of the water goes to the ground and is available to roots. Here's no rotation trial. So that's 9th year of potatoes in the same ground. And lo and behold, they're very healthy plants. Lettuce are 7th year or 8th year even in that case. So I'm doing quite a few of these trials again just to find out more about it. 8th year of cabbage in the same bed. You know, well, what more to say? Just such healthy plants. This kind of knowledge is very empowering because it frees you up to grow a lot more than you thought was possible in a much easier manner. A quick view of before and after. So that's early spring, where we're using the covers a lot. By the middle of April, my garden's pretty much white with new plantings covered over with mostly fleece, a little bit of mesh. And then they come off towards the middle of May. And I'm so joyful then to be able to see the garden again. But it's a very worthwhile thing to do because I find even there we've got fleece on small plants like onions just sitting right on top. That holds the warmth and moisture in it. It's also pest protection. So I do have some rabbits and pigeons, and the early covers, the covering early plants when they're small makes so much difference because that's when you can suffer such big losses. In the summer, we're using more mesh covers because it's more about insects and keeping insects off. And undercover, a quick whiz through the polytunnel year. I'm coming towards the end, so I'm going fast, but it's just to give you an idea. So transplanting mid-April in your calendar, mid-October for us. And then those plants survive through the winter. We keep picking. We did a good pick yesterday. Actually got from that space around 10 kilos of leaves. And that's right in the middle of winter. That's pretty much the low point. And that was 3 weeks growth. We've had some frosty weather, and so the growth has been much slower than normal. But going to spring, which this is, you can see growth is faster. And also there's garlic that we planted at the same time, which by the spring is coming up strongly. As you can see, it's free space. We're not giving the garlic any extra room at all. And yet we get this fantastic growth on the garlic. After twisting out the salad, the garlic does have more room. Then we're putting the annual dose of compost on in May. It's about 4 centimetres depth, horse manure in the middle, green waste compost for the pathways. I want to maximise fertility in there, so I'm not putting wood chip on in this case. And frost protection for the tomatoes. Our last frost day is mid-May here, mid-November in your terms. And once we're beyond that, I plant my cucumbers, for example. So root, sitting on a string which has a knot on the end. That's how we anchor the plants at the bottom of the plant. Roots basically hold the string there. Harvest the garlic early summer, not wait until the tops go green. Sorry, go yellow. You can see the tops on the left there, they're still green. We get less rust in the polytunnel. That's another reason I do it there. Fantastic size garlic. Peel it off at harvest time. And then this is the cucumbers. Just 5 days difference between these photos. June, July, maximum period of growth, all the light and the warmth. If you get a warm June here, we're so happy. Same for tomatoes and melons as well. Last 2 years, the melons have been superb. We've had warm summers. It doesn't always happen. And I put them in the warmest place of my polytunnel because it's oriented east-west, not north-south, which is not really correct, but it does mean you have a warm side in this case. A quick look just towards the end now at seed saving, because I'm very disillusioned by how seed companies are not maintaining a lot of the older varieties. So people buying heirloom or heritage seeds are often disappointed. Well, if they're amateurs, they don't know to be disappointed because they think that's what should grow. But if you get beetroot like this, for someone like me, I can see there's a problem there. And long story short, I'm growing my own seeds where possible, and beetroot I'm using, you can see only 8 there. Is that enough? Some people say you need 40 to get enough genes. Other people are succeeding with 4. You know, again, it's not black and white. Many variables. That's beetroot seed from just one plant. You actually don't need many. I'm giving some away now. I was thinking to sell some, then I realized I can't because I haven't got the license for selling seed. But it's a very nice gift to be able to give people. And winnowing, that's an old skill which you need to relearn if you're going to do this kind of thing. A very nice way, easy way to get clean seed. On the right is borlotti beans, actually, which I grow a lot for winter food of dry beans. And then the result from this beetroot seed just blew me away. The germination rate close to 100% compared to 60% if I'm lucky from bought seed. And not only that, vigor of seedlings and quality of harvest, earlier harvest. So yeah, this is only 3 years ago I started going down this road much. I'd always say things like peas and lettuce, but not the more slightly tricky ones. Chard has been a revelation. I mean, look at that photo on the left. So bought chard seed, as in freshly bought. And again, this is the con. So it says on the packet, packeted year ending. It's probably old seeds. It's very rare, I think, that you'd be buying year-old seed. On the right is my own beetroot seed, 2 years old. So 2 years after harvest. So again, that amazed me. So it makes you think, well, how old is this seed they're selling? Onion seed is a bit more difficult, and you've got to catch them if they're outdoors before the weather gets too wet towards the end of summer, early autumn. And yeah, usually we're managing, but I grow some in the polytunnel as well. That's the chard seed on the right. You need quite a bit of space for chard, and then you'll get a lot of chard volunteers. It's almost like a weed, but it's easy to deal with. That's a sample of seeds on the left, which I do, some of the easier ones. I would say the easier of all is peas. Broad beans are close behind, but you can't grow more than one variety of broad bean because they do cross-pollinate, unlike peas. Lettuce, pea, French bean, tomato, that's the 4 vegetables that don't cross-pollinate. We made some bouillon last spring. This is a nice thing to do if you've got spare leaves in your garden. A lot of celery leaves in there, which I'd normally put on the compost heap. So I got this green powder, which we're eating a lot at the moment in winter, make a drink or a soup. And finally, I'm just finishing with a look at energy, what I call energy gardening. This is new ground, and well, new ground, it's not new. This based on the work of, old-fashioned people who knew more truth than modern science allows us to see. So even before Rudolf Steiner and biodynamic, people were stirring water to energize it. And Schauberger's work on the copper tools was amazing. Again, I'm hoping you can get them in New Zealand. This is something that's worrying me, and I actually put a post about this on Instagram and Facebook yesterday, which has caused quite a storm. I've never had so many comments, and a lot of them are the predictable haters, I would call them, because they're not, they claim they're being scientific now, whereas they're not. The science is actually looking at what's happening and understanding what's going on. And so what I'm finding is I'm getting some success from using this orgone generator based on the work of Wilhelm Reich. He was a true scientist. So true that he got raided by the FBI in 1955 and they burnt his library. Why would they do that if he's a true scientist? And that for me shows that we've got to really keep our eyes and ears open to find out what's really going on in the world. And in terms of gardening, two things. One is, what's in this stuff? I know people who've had their soil tested, they're finding things like barium and thallium in there. Where does that come from? It's actually quoted. You can find that on the internet, as ingredient in this stuff. Aluminium is another one. So that's partly what I'm doing here. I want to keep my soil clean of this stuff. I think all the methods I've been showing you really help with this strong biology, soil life. More than ever now, it's really important that we all grow our own food. And that's why I'm encouraging the next generation as much as I can. And they're responding. I'm so encouraged by this. Like, this is Lara, who's a magnificent woman, lives near here. She's running this school project. Some of you might have seen our webinar we put out 3 weeks ago, which had a fantastic response. And there's a network now building. We've got a newsletter you can sign up to, Future Gardeners. Strength is linking together communities. And through my Instagram account, this guy popped up, Albie. He was only 8 when he started that garden. He's 9 now. He started Noted Garden in his school, and we correspond quite regularly. He's totally switched on and aware. I'm so encouraged when I see that. And just to give you further idea, that's a selection of my books, but on the right is the garden, pretty my garden as it looks roughly at the moment with the cat. And that's late winter. It's obviously the 6 months different to you, but I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. And I'll come out of the screen now. And then, if I could do that. Yeah, here we go. Can you still see me? Oh yeah, I need to stop sharing screen, don't I? Sorry. Actually, how do I do that? I lost the Zoom window. Damn. Oh yeah, here we go. Stop sharing. Brilliant. Right. Hi, Katrina.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. That was such a treat. And as you went over time, I'm like, yes, more. We have a couple of questions in chat, both from Ruth. One of them was asking for detail about the fleece. Sorry, this is Gayleen. And saying we call it sheep's wool. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you. Second question was the orgone generator.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid it's plastic. I've tried natural alternatives like sheep's wool. Just don't work basically, or they're too heavy, or they leave wool all over the plant leaves and so on. So it's some kind of plastic which is spun. It's very light, 30 grams per square meter. Either 25 or 30 grams per square meter density is the one you want. Otherwise, it's too heavy and sits on plants with too much weight. But you also don't want the lighter one, which is 1717. Which is commonly sold, and that falls apart within a few months. You just get stuff blowing around your garden, plastic. I would say it's quite an important thing, particularly for those of you in South Island, more, to get make more of your season. In the spring, you've got a lot of light, which is not able to be used by plants because it's too cold. So the fleece is converting unused sunlight into plant growth. You're losing a bit of light, but you're gaining a lot of warmth, which enables the light to be used. And differentiate it with mesh, which is the nylon squares, and that's against insects in the summer, more fleece and mesh. And the orgone generator, I found a design for that on the internet. If you look up Danielle Bryant chembuster, I avoid using that word chembuster because it's such an emotive term that can put people off. But basically, we don't know what's in this stuff. But basically, I look on it in a more positive way. It's an orgone accumulator. What's orgone? It's a feel-good energy that Wilhelm Reich discovered is coming out of the earth wherever nature is not too tampered with by mankind. And a good garden can be like that. And so the whole thing of no dig and keeping soil healthy is orgone accumulating as well. And a lot of people say to me when they come here, God, there's such a good vibe about this place. This is without any problem from me. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's nice, because I'm just used to being here, so I don't feel it. And in fact, on my videos, a lot of people ask me, they say, what are you on? A lot of people think I'm microdosing. I'm also, I've never taken drugs in my life. I drink a cup of coffee in the morning. Yeah, that's about it. So it's just really nice example, I feel, of the quality, life, the energy. Energy in the sense of the word which science can't measure. And this is where I get into arguments with so-called scientists, people who think that science is all about quantifying things. And if you can't weigh and measure it, it's not scientific. That's an absolute nonsense statement. Most people, I would say 95% and more, believe that. So we've got work to do in terms of education again. you know, just feeling things and also watching growth. You know, I'm not a great fan of soil tests, lab tests, because that doesn't tell you process. It doesn't tell you biology, which is process, how all this stuff interacts and works. And nutrients made available to plant roots links back to no-do and compost, which a lab cannot measure. You know, this is the issue. Science will tend to dismiss as superstition something it can't measure, but which is staring you right in the face. Look, this works. So that's the essence of my approach in all those terms.
Wonderful. There's so much in there. I'm sure a lot of us will be going back and watching the replay and pressing pause and taking notes. But there's lots of thank yous in the chats, fans, someone who's been watching your videos for years. So once again, thank you so much. And to everyone, please go onto the website for the Northland Edible Garden Trail. Just Google Northland Edible Garden Trail and I'll click share there. And once more, thank you, Charles. And yeah, we
One
want
day
to
I'll make
here in New
planned at the
Charles,
moment.
we really want you to come to New Zealand, so we're going to work on getting you out to New Zealand somehow.
Oh, yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it'll be one of your summers, obviously one of my winters. I was blown away when I went to Chile this just recently, as you might have seen it. The response there was formidable, and I really want to encourage no dig worldwide. And another place I'd like to go actually is southern India. There's a lot going on there. It's amazing, thanks to the internet, the reach we're all having. You know, so for yourselves as well, I'd say, you know, keep up your great work, and thank you, Graham, for reaching out in the first place.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Okay.
We'll
Bye-bye
stop
then.
and say good night and have a lovely Friday. Thanks, Charles.
Bye.